This is Lady Ann, owner of KPNL Radio and hostess of the Caravan Library of Lore, and I support Tessa. As an experiencer myself, I have filed my own reports with them, and the professionalism and heart they have shown my case goes above and beyond. If you have had an experience, I cannot recommend Tessa enough.
Hi, this is Ernie Hudson, Winston Zedmore from Ghostbusters. I want to let you know that Ryan Stacy, he's created the Experiencer Support Association, TESA. You can check them out at www.tesacan.org. Now, they investigate paranormal, UFO, and provide support to experiencers. But you can check them out at, like I said, www.tesacan.org and see for yourself if they're really Ghostbusters. I can tell you this, they are a non-profit organization. Good luck, have fun, and keep it blessed.
Good evening. You are listening to Beyond the Tinfoil Hat, a podcast by the Experiencer Support Association. Tessa is a UFO, paranormal, and paracryptid investigation association. We investigate everything belonging to the global phenomenon linked to highly strange and unexplained experiences. We also connect experiencers with other experiencers, creating a safe, positive environment to engage and discuss this phenomenon without judgment, criticism, or retribution. From the land of the white rolling sands on the southeasterly tip of Georgian Bay, to all of you listening around the world, as we simulcast live on KPNL Radio, we salute you. If you want to go back and listen to our previous episodes, go to youtube.com/the Experiencer Support Association. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button and ring that bell to be instantly notified when we are live, not only for these episodes, but every single element Tessa has to offer. On our website, tessacan.org, we have something for everyone. We have support for experiencers, data for independent researchers, and places to advertise for professional partners.
Hello, everybody. Today is Thursday, July 29th, 2021, and I, Ryan Stacy, am your host this evening. Remember to super chat, just click the $ next to your name in the comment box, and remember that all donations go back into the mission. If you're catching this on the replay, please consider becoming a member and unlock bonus content, including behind the scenes, bloopers, and extended footage on our new project developments. Just click the big blue button that says join. Our guest for season 3, episode 25 is two guests. It's actually Dave and Carla. Dave and Carla have been close friends since 1998, feeling a deeper spiritual kinship for each other. Dave and Carla have had spontaneous memories of 29 past lives together while meditating. They went on to get past life regression training with Dr. Brian Weiss. Pardon me if I pronounced that wrong. Now Dave and Carla spread the message of love and kindness and teach holistic approaches to healing. Together, they teach meditation at their local university and senior centers. Dr. Dave was a registered nurse for 10 years before returning to medical school. He recently retired from his private practice. Dr. Dave now serves as the Vice President of Medical Affairs at a small midwestern hospital. Carla recently retired as as his office manager. They now share their message together. The gift of past lives and love is the answer. So, Dave and Carla, both of you, please put on your tinfoil hat. How are you doing this evening? Welcome.
We're doing great, Ryan. How are you?
I'm great. Good to have you. So this is we don't too often have two people on the panel tonight, so this is going to be an interesting show. So before we start, the first thing that we do is an icebreaker. So this icebreaker is brought to us by Tim the Demon Guy Morrison. So I'm just going to play it. So you can find Tim on his podcast, or sorry, on his Facebook page at Tim the Demon Guy Morrison. And what he does is he provides an icebreaker. So I don't know what this is. I'm going to open it right now. I'm going to ask the question, and that's how we're going to kick off the show. So let's see what Timmy's got for me today. I ripped it. Okay, if humans lost the ability to see all colors except for one, which color would you want to survive? That's a deep question, Tim.
That is.
Well, I'll answer.
Go for it.
I would want to say purple because purple is the spectrum of all angel colors, and my personal angel is purple.
Wow.
And I'd know I was in good hands.
I like that. That seems safe. What about you, Dave?
Well, I would probably say white because white and the light is always the way.
Okay. What is the significance of purple and light together? You guys know that?
Well, purple is the bottom spectrum. If you divide light, purple is the lowest spectrum wavelength. I don't remember the highest, but purple is the lowest wavelength on the spectrum of light when you divide white into all of its spectrum.
Okay. So white. I was just curious. I would say green because green's my favorite color. So I don't. So I would have to pick that one. Cool. Right on. So thank you, Tim. You can check out Tim on Tim the Demon Guy Morrison. All right. So let's get into. So the first question I really have for the evening is I understand that you guys are a team. I'm interested in knowing each of your individual lives prior to you guys realizing that you were connected in past lives. So who would like to go first?
Well, I'll go first, but
Okay.
We didn't know that we were connected in past lives until after we began to meditate. Dave can tell you that story.
Okay.
I was raised Catholic, Mormon, Methodist. Methodist when I was married. I've always been somewhat open. I've always been into astrology, and I've gone to mediums. And I was, I thought reincarnation was definitely a possibility. It made sense to me. And I've always had a questioning mind. So when we had our experience, I was not surprised. And other than the fact that I'm retired, yay, that's, I've got 2 marriages under my belt. I guess I can call that experience. And I have 40 years of working in the same establishment under my belt. Other than that, it's all in the book. All the little gory details, but I'll let you talk, Dave.
So, like Carla, I was raised Catholic. Slightly different than Carla. I lived the perfect life in Nebraska and Iowa in a little town, and parents were always present, and graduated from high school, went to college, became a nurse because I went to college to become a pharmacist and didn't like pharmacy school. And after being a nurse for a while and working in Open Hearts, I finally decided I might as well have been a physician because I carried a pager, and back at that time it was pagers and not cell phones. I carried one every day. I worked 10, 12-hour days. I thought I might as well go back to medical school because I'm working hundreds of hours anyway. And so I went back to medical school, and my approach was pretty scientific until this more spiritual experience.
Okay. Thank you. So Carla, you mentioned it's all in the book. So you guys have written 3 books from what I understand. So which book
Well,
are you referring to?
the first book, The Gift to Past Lives with Mother Isabella, God, and Elizabeth, that tells Dave's and my experience that began about 8 years ago. Dave did not know up until that point that he could reach the spiritual world by simply closing his eyes. He never had a clue until we began meditation as an office. He was very stressed out. We had implemented electronic medical records in the office. And, we're not in our 20s. We were used to charts and pen and, pencil. And everything had to go, we were using computers, but not to have everything charted out. And there were all kinds of rules and regulations that went along with it. And it was real stressful. And Dave, who usually is like Yogi Bear and Fred Flintstone, a combination of the two, was very cranky. And I offered to either call a counselor, or I was reading this article in AARP magazine, of all things, about meditation and the benefits. So I suggested to Dave that we do this as an office. And the first couple of days we meditated with the girls. And of course, the first day it was really hard to shut your mind off. Anybody who meditates knows that, your mind keeps having thoughts and it's hard to shut it down. Then the second day, we all mentioned how we saw different colors. And from the beginning of the show, we know I saw purple and Dave saw white and the other 2 girls saw different colors. We know those are our angels. And then the third day of meditation, the girls decided they did not want to meditate and have to come in an hour earlier. So they did it at home, and it was just Dave and I. And we meditated, and then we heard the patient starting to come in. And Dave came up to me and said, Carla, I know you'll think that this is really strange, but I think I was talking to your mother during meditation. And I looked at him and I said, what? And he said, I think I was talking to your mother during meditation. Well, my first thought was, why is she coming to you and not me? Dave never met my mother. She had died like 20 years before that. And so he said she was real jovial and laughing, and she showed me a shoe. And I said, well, what kind of shoe? And I went over to the computer and I Googled shoes, and like 60 or 70 pairs popped up on the screen. And I said, which shoe? And he went over and pointed to a shoe that my mother always wore. She was a ballroom dancer, and she wore a little pump open-toed sandal. And she wore it not just for dancing, but she wore it like to church and for dressing up. So, right away I thought, that's interesting. I was open to it. He thought he was, flipping out. And then my sister also worked in the office at the time, and she went in the back, got her wallet, and came up with a picture of my mother. And she turned it around and showed Dave, and Dave got real emotional. And we both said, what's the matter? And he said, that's the woman that I was speaking with. So go ahead, Dave. I'll let you talk about why we wrote the book.
So, of course, to start with, I thought that I was crazy, or that I was really cracking up, and that maybe I should have gone to a counselor, and Carla was right. But we kept meditating. And first we found out a lot of different things about meditating. And I'll just tell you that meditation has a lot of health benefits. It lowers blood sugar, lowers cortisol, which holds weight onto people. It lowers your blood pressure, reduces anxiety, increases dopamine and serotonin, which gets rid of depression. All things that, as I was researching that, I found out. It's interesting because also part of meditation is trying to be your best self. And so I sort of set a goal to start with, that I would try to be my best self and try to be healthy. And I set a goal to lose 2 pounds a week. Well, because it lowers cortisol and lowers stress, 52 weeks later, I weighed 104 pounds less. So that's just something for everybody to at least pay attention. Now, we kept meditating, and a few days later, I was sitting there meditating, and suddenly I remembered something from 1962. Now, in 1962, I was 3 years old. I lived in Nebraska. my father was going to graduate school in Boston. He packed us up in a little blue sedan with our little green suitcases and drove us across the country, telling us we were going to Boston. And I had no idea what Boston was. But I ended up in Boston for the summer. And I had this memory. And I remembered going to the beach and seeing Ferris wheels in the background and roller coasters. And I was running on the beach and I was screaming and yelling. And suddenly this little girl jumped up and pushed me down. She sat on my chest. She kissed me on the forehead. She got back up, put both hands on her hips, and she yelled, "Be quiet, you're bothering my family." And she stood there with her hands on her hips in this little blue, two-piece blue bathing suit with ruffles and a little pot belly hanging over. And as I'm telling Carla and Paula the story, Carla looks at me and says, "My God, Dave, that was me." Now, I didn't meet her in this life. I didn't meet her, I thought, until 1998. But Carla was telling me the story, and I had met her first in 1962.
And I didn't have to be reminded of that story. I remembered it because, unlike Dave, my parents were they were always splitting up and getting back together again. The good Catholic family, they never got divorced because, I mean, they eventually did many years later. But that particular day, my father and mother were together. We weren't well off. We didn't have a car. So my father rented 2 cabs and took us all to Revere Beach. And when Dave began to tell the story about Revere Beach, Paul and I both knew exactly where it was because it wasn't just sand and water. There was an amusement park in the back, and the way he described it, we remembered. And that day when we arrived, for whatever reason, I was the youngest of 6 girls, I did not have a bathing suit. So the whole family went across the street, and we bought my first brand new 2-piece ruffled blue bathing suit. So when Dave began to tell me the story and the bathing suit, and he described everything to a T, that was one of those aha moments, like, how could you know that? You know, it was unbelievable. And of course, our parents didn't keep in touch. We didn't keep in touch. We never even thought about it again until this memory surfaced during Dave's meditation.
That's interesting. So I just want to make sure I'm paying attention and I'm understanding correctly. So if from my understanding of past life regression, I thought that was under the interpretation that this was the life before you were alive. So if David, you were 3 years old,
I was actually alive. Yes.
So that it's the same life.
It's in this life.
So how do you know that the meditation didn't just unlock a memory of a moment you two shared in this life? Is that a possibility?
But yes. And actually, that's what happened.
Okay.
So
sorry, investigator, just asking this, just paying attention, just wondering.
And we can talk a little bit about that, Ryan, and if you want, I'll even. So both meditation, past life regression, and or even children that remember past lives are all accessing their subconscious memory. And so meditation, past life regression, and children up to about the age of 5 can sometimes remember their past lives. In this case, meditation was just opening me up to an early childhood memory, and most kids really don't remember much before about the age of 3 or 4. And I had never thought about that or remembered that until that day, that I had a memory, and it came to me during meditation. So we kept, so it's interesting, and we can talk a little bit about that as we go. The next thing is we kept meditating because here we're already entertained. We've met Carla's mother. We've had a past life or a current life where Carla and I met each other, 30 some years before, and we didn't remember it. And then as we're meditating, I met another person, and I say person or entity, but her name was Isabella. And Isabella came one day and said, "I have known you for 6,000 years."
That's a long time.
And I was like, "What?" "And I have known you through all of your past lives." Now, that was enough that I really thought I was losing my mind, until a few days later, I had what almost was like the same memory that I had when I was running on the beach in Boston. Except this time I was standing in a dark alley. And I was looking across the alley, and there is Carla. Now I say it's Carla because I knew it was Carla. She still had the same steel blue eyes, but she didn't look exactly like Carla. She was still blonde, a little lighter blonde hair. She was wearing this fringed, ruffled skirt and standing there, and I saw two large flashes, heard two large explosions, felt something hit my chest, and I was thrown back in this dark alley, and I was laying on the ground in the alley, realized I had been shot, and I was bleeding to death. And I told her this, and I said, I don't even know what this is. I meditated the next day, and I got more story. And I realized that I had met this woman that I saw in the alley at a wedding of a man named Angelo. And I had asked her out to go to breakfast the next day, and she didn't say she would go, and she said maybe, and she finally showed up. And we ate breakfast, and then we took a walk along Lake Michigan, along the Chicago coastline, and she's telling me her life story. She tells me her name is Ruby Donaldson, and that she was born in Bullock, Georgia in 1904. Her father's name was James, and her mother's name was Anna. And she'd come to Chicago to learn to be a dressmaker. And somehow she got involved with a man named Angelo who owned a speakeasy, and she was a flapper and she was a dancer and singer in there, and that she had come to the wedding because the regular wedding singer was not going to be there, and Angelo asked her to come at the last minute and sing the wedding songs.
Sure.
And so I'm telling Carla this, and I'm talking about walking along the beach, and she's got this wool gray coat and a little white stocking cap or woolish cap pulled down over her head. And we're walking through, and she's telling me all this story. And Carla, being the most curious person, and probably a little bit like you, Brian, she becomes her own personal investigator. And she runs out the office the next day she didn't work. She was out of the office, and she starts scanning the world. And tell them what happened, Carla.
Well, I actually got onto Ancestry.com, and I found Ruby Donaldson. Actually, found lots of Ruby Donaldsons. But had I not known her name and her parents' names and the year she was born, and that it was Bullock, Georgia, all of those things, I couldn't, if I didn't know the details and the names, I wouldn't have known what to look for, but I did. And I found them all, and I found pictures of my parents and my siblings. I didn't find pictures of me. But then I went further to, I Googled gangsters named Angelo. And I found an Angelo Jenna. Now, I don't know anything about mobsters. If that's what you do, if that's your hobby, you probably know exactly who he is. But his name was Angelo Jenna. He was the head mob guy before Al Capone in Chicago. He had 5 other brothers. They were called like the Terrible Angelo or the Terrible Jenna brothers. They were just violent, terrible people. But I did find their wedding. He married Lucille Spinola on January the 10th, 1925 at Ashland Auditorium in Chicago. And served over 3,000 mobsters. So I was able to, corroborate the names Dave was giving me, and then this wedding information as well.
Mm-hmm. As a guy who collects evidence for a living, I really appreciate that you did a link analysis from his information. So that is very good work. Good job.
Well, you want to believe. At that point, you're saying, okay, you want to believe. Is there some proof? And, with a lot of past lives, they were too long ago. They're not possible to find, but it's the ones that are close, like for instance, that was actually 2 lives ago for Dave and I. Our very last life, we were brother and sister in Chicago. His name was Johnny. My name was Katie. I was 6, he was 4. We were playing on a 3rd-story staircase in our home in Chicago. It was Christmas Eve. Our mother was downstairs wrapping presents, and we fell to our death. We broke our necks. And Dave's spirit guide will not give us anything that can interfere with anybody else's path or their life. She said,
I don't know what's happening, Ryan. So
Okay.
I assume she'll pop back on in a second.
Let's hope so.
So anyway, she went out and she found some of these informations. We couldn't find information on Katie and Johnny, but we could find information on Ruby Donaldson and Angelo Jenna. So we actually are going to make another trip back to Chicago because we think we can maybe tie some of my memory from then. Hi, Carla, you're back.
I don't know what happened. I just went blank.
Yeah,
He picked up the ball and he kept going. It's as if you didn't even leave.
Good job.
yeah. So that we thought about going back to Chicago and seeing if we can find the house or anything that we lived in, because we actually did go back to Chicago after the Ruby and JJ experience. And we went to Little Italy and we walked down Halstead Street, and I walked to the direction I would be remembering. And Isabella was saying, you're going to turn at the next corner because you're getting close. And I turned the corner and I looked across the street. And again, remember, my spirit guide's name is Isabella. Across the street was the apartment that Ruby Donaldson lived in 1925. And we found the apartment. And a friend of ours did the research on the apartment building and found out that it was built in 1899 and had been an apartment building ever since. So we actually found where Ruby lived. We found where she was born. So we got as much information as we could on that life, and we kept getting more memories, and we've shared some of those memories in our book.
And
that's in the first book, The Gift of Past Lives, the Mother Isabella, God and Elizabeth?
yes.
Did I say that right?
That's
Yes.
correct.
And Dave, you didn't tell him the name of the apartments were the Isabel Apartments?
That's right. The Isabella Apartments was a great secret when my spirit guide's name is Isabella.
Mm-hmm.
There's a nail on that's like we're hitting the door right on the nail.
Yeah.
So I have some questions, but
Okay.
I want to add some context. I remember you saying in that life before you dug into that, you felt yourself get shot and you were
Correct.
bleeding big ass. Do you remember where you got shot?
I got shot outside of DeAndre's.
On your body.
Oh, in my chest, right here, close to the heart and shoulder.
Okay, so there's a theory out there that in this life
You could have a scar.
Birthmarks or scars, exactly. So I'm asking you this in real time. You have broken neck. You've been shot. From what I've been told, do you have any marks on your body that can corroborate that?
The only thing I could tell you, Ryan, is a year ago, because I now have a scar that runs down the middle of my chest because I had aortic stenosis in this life. And if they hadn't fixed my aortic stenosis, I would have died. So I suppose the shot in the heart area could be related to my aortic stenosis, but I do not have a scar until they gave me one to cut me in half.
Okay.
However, and I shouldn't be giving this away because it's in the book, but Ruby was shot in the back, and I actually have a mole right where the bullet went through. And Katie and Johnny broke their necks and died. Dave and I both have neck issues. We go to the chiropractor and massage therapist all the time for our necks. So yes, it follows you.
See, yeah, that's interesting, and that's why I wanted to ask that on the spot as I thought about it, so that way, it just kind of throw you for a loop. But that's good because that's how we're trying to understand this. So let's keep this part going in terms of trust. So I'm tracking that you meditated, you had an experience where you guys remembered meeting each other in this life. So that kind of helped you rationalize normal thinking for memories. But then you went further back to a time period where you don't exist. You've had corroborating evidence, so you can, then question how did that information come into being and all that stuff. As you go back into further detail and you listen to your guides and all this and look further back into your past lives, because you mentioned 29? So that's only
29
2.
together, yeah.
Have you done that type of detail on all of them? And if not, how do you trust that the message you're receiving is pure and not, dare I say, demonic or evil on the other side?
Well, again, this comes from Isabella. So she says, if the message seems to be pure, it's probably not demonic. So that's one good spot for most people. If we start looking at the past lives that we've had together, it became very interesting as these life memories would come up, because, I met Carla when she's already 40, and she had already done some life trips, and she did more life trips that I didn't really know she had done. And so
it means
travels, yes. Mm-hmm. So we found, as we were going through, we found a life in Bermuda, and Carla had been in Bermuda
and got married.
We found a life at Chichen Itza involving the Mayans, and she had been there to visit it. We found a life in Scotland and England, and she had been there to visit it. Mm-hmm. We found a life in Italy, and she had been there to visit it, which now she has never been in Turkey, and we know we have a life in Turkey. But a lot of the lives, Carla had already been there, or even in the United States. She had been to North Carolina, where we had a life, and she had family sort of related in South Dakota, where we found a life. Mm-hmm. So it became that there were a whole bunch of synchronicities that were matching up with a lot of the past lives we had, where it seemed as if we were drawn to areas that we had been before. Mm-hmm. And we've been to England, and we've been to Spain, and we found lives in both of those.
Spain and Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you guys worked together for many years. How many years did you work together?
25.
Did any of these travels happen while you guys were working, or these memories? Or was this like prior to her working with you guys working together?
Well, our experience together started in 2014, and I began working for Dave in 1998.
Okay.
And I had done extensive travel up until that point and after.
Okay. No, I'm just trying to understand too, because you guys are meditating. You guys are actually, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the process of meditation. Let's walk through that. So you guys are ready to go back in time or go and find a life. Walk us through that. How does that work?
Well, it's for me, Ryan, it's now very easy. I can almost close my eyes and get there within seconds. Now, it didn't work that way to start with. It's like the connection had to be built over time a little bit. Early on, I would meditate. I would start to tell some of what I was seeing. And we didn't know it at the time, but Carla was sort of doing a little bit of past life regression, because she would start to help me relax and would ask questions, and the details would come out, sort of like you do if you're doing past life regression. Mm-hmm. So here's some of those things that you sort of need to know. And there is a theory that we all carry our past life memories, that it's called the Akashic record, or it's a conscious stream that follows us from life to life, or that it's within our soul, which is what Carla and I really believe, that the Akashic record of that consciousness really is our soul that follows us from life to life. If you look at science, you start to realize that subconscious is a memory, and you'll have to understand how it kind of works. If you touch something that's hot the first time, it burns you, and you pull back. The second time you touch something hot, you burn yourself, and you pull back faster because the subconscious has loaded it into a modular portion of your brain and put it in as a memory. And so if you're looking at past life memories, they're recorded in that same subconscious. And so if you do meditation, which opens the subconscious, now here's part of the rest of the science. You have to know that meditation, past life regression, because it's a form of hypnosis. If you look at the brain of a person while they're being hypnotized or while they're meditating, they actually have increased alpha and theta waves. And when they do studies, alpha and theta waves are related to memory. And so even if it's a past life memory and you get alpha and theta waves, you're getting memories pulled out of your subconscious that comes back into your conscious, and then you can tell the story. Does that make some sense, Ryan? And so there is some science behind what hypnosis does. Now, there's a lot of people out there now looking for research related to this, where we can talk about portions of the brain that activate fantasy and portions of the brain that activate memory. And they're working on how to separate the two spots because they're very closely shared. And if you can split the blood flow between the memory phase and the fantasy phase during past life regression, you could actually separate what people have that is a fantasy memory, or they're bringing up something they read in a book and they don't realize it, or they saw a story on TV and they bring it up, versus what's a true memory. When that happens, they'll be able to do even more scientific study on this.
And that's where that corroborating investigative side on the outside is important, because all those factors that you mentioned, again, with me asking the question, all these things are things that people could use to just kibosh it or debunk it, or try to at least.
Correct.
So the validation, the corroboration is a very good tool to use to help reinforce, at least for yourself, right? It's going to be a lot harder to prove it to the masses, but you want to. I'm good, and I'm happy to see that you guys are at least doing that with yourselves, so that way when you produce and create these books as well, that you're doing that with the purest intention. So I really do appreciate that.
Can I just say something?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Please.
We started to journal from the very beginning. Everything that Dave saw and heard, everything that I see, and a lot of it I draw. And during all of these times of meditation, it got to the point where Dave's spirit guide, Isabella, was teaching him that past lives are fun, they're entertaining, but they're not just that. We come back, we reincarnate because it's for a reason. We need to overcome something. We're not learning something, obviously. So one of the things that we did in our first book, we actually have 20 of our past lives in there, the stories. We have a great amount of details. In fact, we had to take a lot of the details out. Because otherwise, it was 300 and some pages, but there's a lot of details about our lives. But at the end of each one of those lives, we tell what we did in that life that got us into the situation where we reincarnated into the next life. For instance, this is what Isabella tells us. If you take the 10 Commandments and you reduce them down, she calls it the 5 simple rules for living. And that is, if you live a life without conceit, jealousy, selfishness, and unforgiveness, and everything you do is out of love, then you get off the karma wheel. But it's really hard to do, because if you think about it, all of our actions, you can relate them to one of those 4 nasty little habits we're all guilty of. We like to call them just positive and negative actions rather than bad or good or sin. And we've all been saints and sinners. We're all guilty. If you go back in some of Dave's and my earlier lives, he was actually a pharaoh, and I poisoned him. We've all done very terrible things in our lives, and the point is not to beat yourself up and not to be guilty for it. It's just to learn from it and not do it again. And in our last life, we told you about when we were brother and sister and we fell to our deaths, we were so young. That wasn't our karma, but rather somebody else's. There's always a lot of lessons in everything that happens, because remember, it's not what happens to you, it's how you handle it, and that's how everybody else handles it as well. So the lives are entertaining. Sometimes they can be confirmed, sometimes they cannot. I mean, if you're on these reincarnation sites, you see that there's, 10 women who all say they're Marilyn Monroe, and we know that that's not possible. And it doesn't really matter who you were or if you were famous, because obviously they weren't that great if they came back again, right? They weren't doing everything right. They came back again to learn. So, just having money and being famous, that's no big deal unless you're using it wisely and you're making all of your actions out of love and doing what you're supposed to do.
Which Ryan brings up the big question of karma. Carla kind of mentioned that. And again, from the science point of view, using the same idea, when you touch something that's hot, it burns you and you remember that and you pull back faster. When you first taste sugar, it tastes good. And that's also recorded, because every positive and negative experience that you've ever had is recorded. That's how you learn. And those memories keep following you. Even if you can't consciously remember them, they're still there teaching you. I hope that J.J. Wright in Chicago realized he shouldn't stand in a dark alley behind a speakeasy where mobsters may shoot you. Those are the kind of lessons you need to learn, because it's going to kill you. But, all of those kind of lessons are in there. And then we start to learn that if you follow those lessons, you can get off this wheel. And then Isabella started to tell us that you had to understand that part of this was God's plan to begin with. So you're looking at, a loving God would give you chance after chance, just like any loving parent would, to learn and grow. The first time your child, runs out into the street, you don't immediately, box them up and send them back. And you don't keep them in the box for the rest of their life unless you're sick. You tell them no, teach them how to live right, and send them back as another chance. And so we soon learned that there was no hell. We started to learn and do some of the research sort of on the religious side, and we found out that 33% of the world believes in reincarnation, which makes it, if you look at Christianity, which is about a third of the world, you would say that those who believe in reincarnation is about the same percentage of people in the world. And yet in the United States, it's considered something strange that nobody believes in. If you start doing the research and reading back, you find that one of the early church leaders was Origen of Alexandria, Egypt. And in the year 200, when he was writing his part of the early church doctrine, he was writing the transmigration of the soul, pre-existence of the soul, and a post-existence of the soul existed. So the story that the church starts to tell after that changes. About 200 years after Origen, in 200 AD, the church excommunicates Origen and says, we can't possibly believe in reincarnation, because if you believe in reincarnation, then we can't believe there's a heaven and a hell. And if there's no hell, we can't there's no fear of which we can use to control the people. And so it changes. And then you start to realize that if that is true, then a lot of the stories that we know are probably not quite true, because church, governments, families have all used fear to control us. And what it really is personal responsibility should control you. And that's what karma is. You're responsible for your own actions. If you don't start to make good decisions and good choices, do not be surprised when you come back in a situation that's uncomfortable.
Do you guys believe in the future possibly doing exactly what you're doing, but going back and connecting with you guys now? Is there any evidence of our future selves doing past life regressions and connecting to us in real time? Like, is it always back, or can you move forward?
Okay. So Carla and I did do past life regression training with Dr. Brian Weiss, and he was a psychiatrist who was the head of Mount Sinai Hospital down in Florida. He was also, I can't remember if it's Yale or Harvard, but he was also there once. And he started with doing hypnosis to help his patients find their trauma as children. And he had people accidentally go past childhood into their previous life. And he's become one of the major writers in this area. So he wrote a lot of books, and he's trained thousands of people in past life regression. He has tried to regress people into the future. And people have experiences while doing that. The problem is, because of free will, you can't always say what's going to happen in the future. So he's only looking at a potential possible outcome. Because everybody has free will, that outcome can't be proven. And the other part of this, Ryan, is this may be a little complicated, but when they're doing quantum physics studies and they take many small particles and they start to circulate them around and then explode them, and then they do the computer model that shows what happens, and then they run the computer model backwards, the same thing doesn't happen again. So you can't actually travel back in time. You can only get the memory from back in time. So it would be hard for the future to contact us because they can't travel back.
We can't go back to the future.
We can't go back to the future. You got it.
Yeah. Okay, so Carla, do you have any comment on that?
No, he always explains it a lot better.
Okay. The other question I had, and this is one of the questions I saw in the comments, and then I'll get to the questions that Dave asked before we get to commercial break, but have you ever had a past life on a planet other than Earth?
No, we have not.
Okay. That's a good question, by the way, because that could confirm, life on other planets, but that's good then. Yeah. So thanks.
So Ryan,
yeah, go ahead.
How much time do we have? If we got just a minute. So
we have 10 minutes. We have 10 minutes.
So we've never had a past life on another planet. In talking with Isabella, our soul or consciousness seems to be an evolutionary stopping point. So as we evolved, it appears that our lives start to appear at about 6,000 years ago. And that's an evolutionary spot where the soul gets placed into the human, which means that the human at that time had developed some sort of receptor that allows the soul to connect with the physical body. So the spiritual part connecting to the physical part. If you talk to the researchers in reincarnation, most of them believe, especially because most past life regressionists, unless they guide their people won't report that they've had a life on another planet. Most won't report that they've had a life as an animal.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the children who have past life spontaneous memories between 0 and 5 don't report life as an animal in their past life. So they believe that we probably have a receptor in the human that makes it possible for us to reincarnate so that our soul or consciousness can connect again with another life, which would mean that our receptor is probably different than an animal or any other species. So we should not be able to reincarnate cross species. And that's what Isabella also tells us.
Okay. Okay, so let's got two good questions here before break. Let's bring this one up. So Scarborough Sasquatch Station says, confused here a bit with Dave and Carla. Were they married and have kids in their past life, or is it just casual meetings in different places? How real can these meetings be and not a dark deceit? Does that make sense to you guys?
I think so.
Well, we've been married several times in past lives, but I've also been his mother and his sister, his neighbor, his schoolmate. I don't know why how are they relating dark to being married? I mean, I get it. I've had two.
I think it's just married and casual.
Oh.
Yeah,
So-
like is it all positive, or did you ever have a negative past life experience, with the exception of being shot? Obviously that's pretty negative, and dying and breaking your neck, but I mean, like, so, like, I guess
Okay.
what he's trying to
So yes, Ryan, again, we had
Just
a
one,
life.
really.
No, well, we had the life where Carla killed me, and she was my wife in that life. But we actually have a life at the Mayan time where I am some sort of lesser Mayan priest. And during that life, it's a great portion that we are always happy when we're at war, because when we're at war, we capture some of the other soldiers and we put them to death as a sacrifice to the sun god. And the main priest comes in and sticks his hand down through the chest of a living person who we have tied across an altar, draws out the heart and drains the blood into the stone mouth of the sun god. And I've had that memory. I don't call that a very positive memory. Okay. Carla was one of the little girls, because when we weren't at war, they would send us out and we'd have to pick a family, and we'd bring the little virgin girls in, and the virgin girls would all be tied across the altar, and they didn't get killed, but they stuck spines in their arms and drained their blood as they were tied across the altar. And it was really horrifying memory to see. And then they'd take that blood and pour it into the sun god. And so I knew Carla, I had met her, and I helped drug the little girls before they went in so that they wouldn't remember this. One of those little girls did die during one of those. And I remembered carrying the little girl back to her family. It was a horrible, horrible memory. And as I walked through the streets of Chichen Itza, the other Mayan women ran out into the street, and they all stuck their arms out because they all had the scars from the spines going into their arms. So we were yearly bleeding out women to give blood to the sun god. So it was joyful when we were at war, because at war we would put someone who was our enemy and sacrifice them instead of our own people.
Dave, can I just say that I can talk casually about this now because we've had many years to adjust to this. But the day that Dave told me that story back in 2014, he prefaced it with saying to me, Carla, please don't think differently of me, but I want to tell you about a life that I found. Well, he told me his part in it, but then he told me that the high priest named Terrell, that was performing these sacrifices was actually my husband. And I can laugh about that now. But, people that are in the reincarnation world, they know all about soul groups and soul families. And when you reincarnate, you travel back with the same groups of people over and over again, usually for one of two reasons. Because you get along great together, like Dave and I, or because you have karma together. And my husband, who was the priest at that time, we've had many lives together, 16, in fact. And he has also been in Dave's life over and over and over again. And my first husband in this life was actually the gangster Angelo Genna that was my boss when I was the flapper in 1925. So we had karma. He owned me, he raped me, he beat me. But in this life, when I married him, I walked away from him. He couldn't own me in this life. So our karma is really good. So, it sounds horrible when you hear about these lives, but if you understand we're all playing a role, we're playing a role. We're thrown into a situation, right?
Right. And we
And
also have a million laws against that kind of stuff now. So that
yes,
helps.
now.
That helps.
Mhm.
Yes.
It
does
does.
help.
But if you know that you're playing a role and that, when I first found out some of the things, some of the past lives where my husband had been involved, I thought, oh God, and I married him again. But but now I understand. You have a draw to these people for a reason. You're drawn because you have something to accomplish with them. And the important thing is to not hold a grudge against them. The important thing is to love them regardless. My mother's father was an abuser, and I held a terrible grudge against him for years and years until I learned a little bit more about his story. And it's easy to understand and easy to forgive people if you know they're playing a role and they're not doing it. It's not just all about you and against you. They're playing a role for both of you. For instance, I just saw in one of the rooms the other day, one of the reincarnation sites, this girl was saying she's madly in love with this guy and he won't give her the time of day. And she doesn't understand it. She doesn't understand how she can be so in love with somebody who doesn't, love her back. And my answer to her was, perhaps in a former life, he was in love with you and you wouldn't give him the time of day. So if you think that way, if you understand it that way, it's a lot easier to take. Dave's forgiven me for poisoning him.
Yes, I have. I do check what she puts in the pot roast, but
So no, this is interesting. My wife and I, we occasionally discuss this topic of past lives and things like that, and she believes in the regression and the past life more so than I do. I do understand the concept, and I do resonate with this. I've never meditated to the point where I intentionally unlocked or saw any lives, but I can relate to that feeling that we share, that we know that this is not the first life we've had together. So that
Right.
soulmate feeling, and a little bit mushy here, she's watching, but but I can tell, I can tell that this isn't the first life we've had. And we joke, we'd be like, yeah, remember when we built the pyramids, that was fun, whenever, things like that. But,
so Ryan, you may have.
I may have, but as an investigator who has pled allegiance to the world to be neutral as much as I can, I can't get regression. I cannot get hypnotherapy. I can't unlock that code yet. Not yet, because once that wall is cracked, there's no going back. So one more question that was asked, and then we'll hit the commercial, and then we'll jump back into it. Sarah Breeze, you're a new name, so welcome to the channel. What meditation do you prefer? Is there a preference for this particular subject?
Well, they put a lot of names on a lot of different meditation. You don't need anything fancy. The way we started it, we were sitting in a dimly lit room. We had soothing music, and all you need is yourself. Some people meditate without music. Some people meditate with their eyes open. For us, it worked to have meditation, to have music playing and our eyes closed, because it was less of a distraction. And we taught meditation. And what we would teach the people was to start at the top of your head and imagine a warm white light entering your body through all parts of your body, and breathing consciously and listening to your oxygen going in and going out, taking it from, your forehead, through your eyes, through your nose, through your ears, just slow and methodical, and for at least 30 minutes. And it's really hard to do. You will not do it right off the bat unless you're like Dave, fortunate. But it's even hard for me now, and we've been doing it all of these years. But pay attention to when you're between wake and sleep, because that's when I get a lot of pictures and messages and things. And if you start to get things like that, jot them down. Mm-hmm. But you don't need anything fancy. Brian Weiss has a meditation CD. There's lots of them on YouTube, but you don't even need it. You just need yourself and some music.
And Carla mentioned an important point, the point between wake and sleep, that time when people remember dreams. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, that's the same time you have increased alpha and theta waves again in the brain. So there is that memory cue that occurs in your brain in that period of time, that occurs with meditation, that occurs with past life regression hypnosis, that is drawing up memory.
So our last guest from last week was Lori and Fenton, and we, on the topic of download, I asked her when she normally has her downloads, and she said during awake and sleep, mm-hmm. during mm-hmm. that exact same moment.
Yes.
So what, in your opinion, is the difference between that download phenomenon versus this meditation connection with consciousness? Is it the same?
I think it's the same. It's that mm-hmm. same moment that the mm-hmm. brain is receptive to subconscious. And again, there's a couple different theories, because it's easier for most people to think of consciousness as being the soul that keeps coming with you. But one of the theories of consciousness is that this is actually a stream that exists in shared spaces. So download would come from that same shared space.
We all know I've had one of those, so maybe we'll get into that when we get back. So let's all right, so let's pause right here. And where's my little thing? Okay, we'll continue after a message from our professional partner. Remember, also, if you're listening to this live on KPNL Radio or another future podcast, head over to youtube.com/The Experiencer Support Association. So that way you can see the video that goes with this audio. Just trying to time it. And yes, so remember, you're listening to Beyond the Tinfoil Hat, a podcast by the Experiencer Support Association, and we'll be right back.
Ryan is one of Canada's leading new UFO investigators. He conducts and oversees UFO investigations on a constant basis and was really taken by his research. He's compiled a tremendous amount of data regarding UFOs in Canada. And just as interesting, he really goes over how UFO investigations are done and what are some of the mistakes that people make when they submit evidence. Note for starters, don't edit your videos or photos before you send them. If you want to hear more follow-up conversation between Ryan and myself, you can go to richardolanmembers.com, where we have a candid conversation on ufology, the paranormal, and more. And remember, while we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be good to each other.
The same thing that draws aliens to our planet is the same thing that draws us to others. Exploration, curiosity, sustainability of life. That's why we go. It would make sense as to why they're visiting here.
Drop
Quit playing around, man. Get back here.
Travis! The last thing I remember was this numbing shock. Stunning sort of a feeling. Very powerful.
Get away from me!
I was just out of my mind with fear, just screaming the whole time.
It's been theorized that aliens prefer remote areas because they don't want to attract attention. Whatever it is that they're doing, they would want to do that in a less populated area. There are multiple accounts of the same thing from people from all over the world. People that do not know each other, do not live in the same cultures, and they're all looking up, they're all seeing things in the sky. So it would be naive of us to think that we're alone in the universe.
My mission is to assist and help those experiencing this phenomenon in such a way that they're able to continue and live with it, and also in a way that it can be measured, quantified, and reinforced within today's society, so that way it can be accepted and no longer viewed in a negative way. One thing that I do value in people is the ability to sense and feel when something is right and when something is wrong. That is a natural ability that we all share. Now, when we combine that with the paranormal and ufological abductions or visits, I have this sensation that these abilities are connected. Not everyone can sense, not everyone can feel. However, those who can are typically connected with something that we cannot explain. And part of my research is not just to investigate the experience, but it's also to understand and study the experiencer to find out what they have in common with other experiencers, to try to figure out what the actual makeup is in order to be on that spectrum. There's a lot of it happening all over the world, and I do not know of any other study that is focusing on the individuals as people, only the phenomenon. Welcome back. You are listening to Beyond the Tinfoil Hat. If you're enjoying this episode so far, consider becoming a member of our channel or send us a super chat. Your membership will get you bonus content like exclusive videos, and it will help us reach our goal of launching our training center, Interstellar, the Academy of Ufology and Paranormal Studies. Also, remember, if you've ever experienced an unexplained event involving the paranormal, UFOs, extraterrestrials, Dogman, or any other paracryptid, head over to testacan.org/reporting system. The more reports we get, the more we will understand this phenomenon and how it affects our people. Let the others who have already reported be that example that proves that we are making a difference. If it wasn't for these reports, we would not be able to do what we do, and for that, we thank you. Welcome. Oh, right. Hello. Welcome back. How are you guys doing?
Good.
We're doing great, Ryan.
Great. Good. So first hour done. That was jam-packed. I got a heck more of questions for you, if that's okay. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great.
Good. Okay. So I just wanted to I wrote some during the break too, because I kind of wanted to frame this out to kind of lead into some idea that I got going on here from this conversation. And that's why I love this live and off the cuff stuff, this fresh, because I'm learning too, right? But this is kind of stuff that I'm resonating with, so I'm really enjoying this. So you've mentioned past lives and events. You've mentioned Mayans, you mentioned pharaohs. So we're going back and mentioned, going backwards in time. But have you ever gone back to the beginning, like the cradle of civilization?
So, Ryan, we have all right, where to start this? So, because again, Isabella tells us, so in our first book, there is a small section that Isabella sort of dictated, which is interesting. It talks about explosion, intensity of heat so hot that it became cold, and the explosion that expanded the universe, the beginning of angels, the beginning of all spirit guides and souls, the creation of the earth. And as Isabella was going through, and Carla was just typing it out as Isabella was talking through me, it talks about 13.8 million years ago when this existed. And it fits the story pretty close to what science talks about. At least it's close. And so so we see that from the Big Bang on is sort of described by Isabella in the first book. It then starts to talk about that the soul was placed at about, 6,200 years or something by now. 6,000 years ago, when the human had reached a specific point in their development, which means that evolution has occurred so that the soul could connect. Now, whether the soul physically lives inside this shell or just connects to the shell, I don't think it really matters. But the soul starts to connect to the human at the time when the human can start to make conscious decisions. Now, the human soul, the human being before that certainly had civilization, because civilization starts before 6,000 years ago. But it's really when the point where communication became significantly deep enough that we could actually communicate not only with God or the spirit world, but we could also communicate with ourselves in such a way that we could make a commitment for the future. And that's a big point in humankind. That's when we start seeing reports from the Sumerians who had their religious belief, and if you look at the Jews, they had the beginning of most Abrahamic religions, they have their moment when they start to communicate with God, because that part of the human evolution was far enough along that we could communicate, or a soul could connect here. And as the soul could connect to the human body, this human experience could connect to the spiritual world at the same time. And everybody could actually hear God, or could speak to people who had already passed, because they actually existed. And at that point, the communication starts. So there's something with our soul connecting to this human experience that allows this human experience to connect to the spiritual world. And that's where most people get their experience of connecting with a ghost or someone who's passed on, or there's an experience with that mediums have, and et cetera, that they're connecting to the spiritual world or heaven, or those who have passed on.
So have you, it makes sense. And that's kind of priming me for my next question too. But before I go into that, specifically, have you guys ever had a life where you've walked as maybe the in Sumerian times, Anunnaki maybe? Do you remember being any of those, or were you always humans, or were you always of this earth?
We were always of this earth, and if you start to talk about the Anunnaki, that's really Sumerian, and that would be 2,000 or 3,000 years before the 6,000 years that we're talking about. So there's a society there, but that society is not connecting to a soul. So the human species doesn't, people hate it when I say this, but that being, that human before then did not have a soul. More like it would be an animal. Their communication wasn't deep enough. They couldn't connect.
Okay.
So we don't have a Sumerian life. I'm sorry.
No. I just that's a life that I study. That's a life that I'm interested in. So I was just curious to hear, what it was like back in the day, if you knew, right? That's all.
I
That's
think
all. It's just
I
curious.
think that's great. In our first life, it is a life where we were born, and this is in book 2. Jerusalem was not there, but we were born on the Mount of Olives. And as Isabella was sharing that life and we saw that life, we left there because no one else was like us. And I met Carla and we traveled down the Dead Sea and we settled in an area that is now the Ian Getty. And interestingly enough, in the Ian Getty, they now have a place that's always been called David's Stream. And in that first life, my name was David and Carla's name was Ariella. And when we did the research in Hebrew, we found out Ariella is spelled the same in Hebrew as Carla is spelled in Hebrew.
Synchronicities.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very weird. Okay, so how does all of this in your current lives fit within the ultra spectrum? So what the ultra spectrum is for us is the combination of the ufological community and the paranormal community. So we can easily associate this past lives with like as you mentioned, spirit attachment or seeing our loved ones from the past. So if this exists, so there's residual energy in current lives too. So what are your thoughts on that? And then separately, what are your thoughts on connecting this with extraterrestrials, to be more specific? And then if possible, how is it all connected, which is what we call the ultra spectrum?
Okay. So you probably will have to remind me in a minute, Ryan, all those things you just said, because the first thing is the connection with the spiritual world is a connection, I think, is a gift that everyone has, but everyone doesn't open. And so apparently it was relatively easy for me, or I by accident fell on the right path and got into it during meditation. But I think there's so many experiences that people have where they're experiencing someone who's passed over, and mediumship and all of those. Certainly that's sort of in the same portion of the spectrum. I have had visits from my father who's passed, and I've had visits from Carla's mother's who's passed, because I have a connection into that spectrum. Now, from the UFO side, there's a couple of things within this spectrum that might be a little related. So we'll try to explain that. Certainly, there's an experience that many people in this spectrum have had, which is called astral travel. It's sort of that out-of-body experience. So that's potentially it's experiencing your soul not being particularly attached, or your consciousness not attached to the physical body at that moment, and either returning into the spiritual world where it connects, or connects to some other part of the world and can see things that are not inside your body. It's part of that same experience that happens during near-death experiences. And many of the past life regression and near-death experiences have a lot of significant parallels. People who've had a past life regression sometimes will remember the time between lives, and they'll remember their atonement period or their past life review period. People who have NDEs die, their soul or being leaves their body, and they go to the spiritual world or to heaven, and they remember having a past life review. They remember seeing their loved ones who have already passed, and that they're told they have to come back. And they're actually, most of them say they don't want to come back because it's so beautiful there. So that astral travel portion that might be part of what a near-death experience is, where you actually leave the physical presence and see your presence somewhere else. Mm-hmm. That can very much be related. Now, if you're talking about UFO, certainly an abduction experience could seem like an astral projection experience, where you're taking some part of your consciousness is experiencing something outside of your body. Because I don't know that there's lots of evidence that the body ever disappears from the earth, but something leaves the earth when some people think that they're having this experience where they're being abducted. So that's much like an astral projection type of trip. The other part of this is some people who may be having this experience are really connecting, maybe not to a UFO, but to a spiritual being. And certainly, unless you've been there many times, the people that you see in the spiritual world, we fill in details. This is one of the things our brain is really good at. We see something, but we can't figure out what it is because we don't have the senses to figure it out in the spiritual world. So it appears if it has form, but the form frequently looks abnormal. The eyes frequently look like they're nothing but light and energy. So if you see an angel and you don't, if you're not connected very well, you're going to see a being that looks like a large-headed, large-eyed creature of some kind that doesn't have a mouth, that is speaking to you telepathy-wise. That sounds a lot like a lot of UFO abduction experiences. So that's the closest thing that I can do to try to explain what might be in the same spectrum of what we're seeing.
So you did an amazing job, because the research that we do is trying to remove what there actually are archetypes, these terms that you've mentioned: astral projection, near-death experience, alien contact, abductees. These are all just categories that were created to describe the some sort of hyperactivity of our consciousness connection. So it's psychogenic manipulation. It's in our experience or testimony, it's really hard to prove to the material world that these events have happened, because we want those nuts and bolts. But with the science through consciousness learning and all these different types of things that prove that it is possible that our consciousness can go somewhere else, then it lends more credibility to the possibility that the reason why they can't take a photograph of a UFO craft or abduction phenomenon is because it's not happening physically. It's happening mentally. And it's not made up. It's just that's the method of operation. And we're having a hell of a time trying to find physical evidence to support that. But that's why we created this classification scale called the ultra spectrum, where we're able to give at least the experience credit to say that it's possible with all this new science, that it happened in your mind, but that doesn't mean you're crazy.
No, whether they're abducted or they're seeing someone in the spiritual world, they're having an experience that has some credibility, even if they don't know what the experience is.
And then the interpretation are these archetypes through marketing and media and all this other stuff. And that's the hard part. But could we collectively agree that what brings all these things together is our consciousness? And then on both sides, it doesn't matter what we believe. And that's the problem we have in society, is that there's some racism or prejudice between both factions, but really it's the same thing. And if we put our science together, we might have an answer. But we don't. Still don't.
So we could share our experiences, and that's one of the reasons we're on podcasts just like yours. Is if we don't share our experience, and part of our experience is the part of the beautiful story, which is this is not the end experience. This is not just one life, and that there is an existence after this life, and what you do in this life matters.
sharing your experience matters.
Correct.
Because there's people that are listening right now that might also listen on the replay that may have experienced the same thing. And up until this moment, they could have been alone. So this. I want to thank you both for if this is the first time we've met, but if this is something you've been doing for a long time, please continue to share your experiences, because others need to know that they're not the only one affected by this phenomenon. We may not understand what it is, but it's comforting to know that whatever you're experiencing, if it can't be explained by science, at least you're not the only one. So thank you.
Correct. And Ryan, I keep trying to look at science every time I can, to look at something. We get to the third book and we talk about zodiac signs and how those draw people together. But if you look at, there's a science out there, part of this quantum physics, that says two particles can be entangled and related to each other, even in different spaces, and drawn to each other. Well, Carla and I have been drawn to 29 past lives together. In this life, we were drawn together as 3 and 4-year-olds, and still didn't meet again for 35 years, and then we're again drawn together. Those synchronicities mean that there is forces outside of what physical science can explain that draws people into certain circumstances.
I can corroborate that. A little personal information, though. I grew up in raising or babysitting or taking care of my wife's brother. So I never met her until many years later, but they were separated, and like just kind of the way the family is orchestrated. But then we later met, all our things have come together. And then as the families were coming together, we realized that like we were always in each other's family.
Yes. And that's those are forces that are out there.
Yeah.
And
so I agree that's possible. It happened.
Yes.
Definitely. Over and over.
My earbuds are dying, so I'm just going to switch over.
All right. I don't hear you, Ryan.
I don't hear you.
Okay, how about now?
Yep.
Now I do.
Now we hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry.
Very good.
Any comment from you, Carla? You've been quiet for a little bit.
Well, the synchronicities are all there if you're paying attention to them and you're open, especially with soul groups and soul families. Many times we have done podcasts and I recognize the host, and then later I will see them in a life that we've had. You're not always closely related, but one particular girl, and we don't meet these people ahead of time. We don't know them ahead of time. But then I have different symbols for different lifetimes, and I'll see them with that particular symbolism, and I know that that's a certain life. And I'll go to Dave, and he'll ask Isabel, and she'll say, yeah, that's so-and-so from this life, and she was your daughter, or she was your granddaughter, or blah, blah, blah. And we have so many details. I mean, we have journals and so many hard drives or thumb drives full of information from all of these synchronicities and things that happen. So you should pay attention to those things, because we're drawn together for lots of reasons.
Yeah. The other thing, Ryan, and I'll give you an example. We try to do some research when we can find something that's different that we can use. Again, I told you there's a life 4,000 years BC on the Mount of Olives in Israel. And during that life, over and over again, they used the word Ahav and Ahava. Now, I had never heard Ahav and Ahava before, but we went out and we looked at old Hebrew, and it was to love and to love without expectations. Now, the fact that that was a word that was used over and over again, and there are some people who have had past life regressions that have actually spoke in languages that they never learned because their memory is so good. Now, most of the time, I'm seeing what's happening and I feel like it's translated and I get it in English. But every once in a while, we get a word that's different, and we look it up and we find that the word exists in that time frame that we didn't know. Or I had a name Rodebert in one life. Well, it's really an old English name for Robert, but I didn't know that until we went and looked for it. So those kind of things keep popping up, and they're things that I don't know, but we find out. Or we find out things in past lives. There's a life in England, and as I'm telling the story, I keep using the word breeches. Now, I never used the word breeches at any time in my life, but I kept using the word breeches for pants. Just like in the Ruby and JJ story, I laid out my trousers. Now, I used pants, but JJ laid out his trousers for the night before. And Robert in Old England would get out his breeches for the next day. Those kind of little things always make the story interesting because it's like, now when did I don't use that word.
What about genetic memory? Like, forget the consciousness.
Okay.
How about the bloodline? Is it possible that these are characteristics that are carried through our blood? Like, do you have any blood in your past in this life that could link your family to those time periods?
Some of them no. Carla did do Ancestry.com, and it didn't show that her blood was in all of the places that we've been. But so that, I mean, whatever that ancestry test is, but it actually showed she had less Italian than she thought she did. But we did have an Italian life, and she does have people that her grandfather was from Italy. So,
well, and there are a lot of people that are reincarnated back through the same bloodline. We've done that a couple of times. I'm sure you could draw those lives back with a lot of people. It's not that uncommon, really. It's that the lives have been so long ago that you have a hard time connecting the dots.
Yeah, no, I understand that too. I'm just thinking because I use Ancestry.com as well, mainly for investigations because it's a very good resource tool to locate people. But I participated in the DNA donation program, whatever that is for.
So it's interesting, Ryan, that you even talk about this. This is one of the things in book 3.
Okay. Which is called the manual.
The manual, yes. Right. Book 1 was The Gift of Past Lives with Mother Isabella, God, and Elizabeth. Then there's Hell No Reincarnation, which has a lot of reincarnation research, some look into the religion as we tried to.
There's the manual.
And then the manual. There's the manual. In the manual, it's interesting because you talked about wounds. So certainly the soul or consciousness can affect physical manifestations in the next life. So that either has to be genetic or non-genetic. But if it's, so this is an interesting thought, but so you have to think about it. The soul doesn't necessarily enter the fetus at conception. The soul, people do have memories of being within the womb. If you do research around the world, it does appear that some people have exactly 9 months between reincarnation. There are some smaller groups that believe that the next person reincarnates, within 9 months after they die. But depending on when the soul enters the fetus will affect the physical manifestations of the next life. So if the soul enters the fetus really early or connects with the fetus really early in utero, it has a longer period of time to cause physical expression. So if somebody entered the fetus early, they would very likely pass on a scar from an injury in the past life, because they would be able to cause some manifestation. If they enter the soul enters very late, it cannot cause much physical manifestation during the developmental time. So if there are people doing research now, especially on eye recognition, and so that someday we could do a database of a picture of everybody's iris, and you could see where iris is repeated over time. And that would be the person's soul expressing in their eyes, because it's always something in the eyes that you can see.
Mm-hmm.
There are people doing research now trying to use computer-generated recognition software to try to see somebody physically. And then if you could get an actual picture of them long enough ago, matching the physical facial structure with the facial structure of that person in a past life. Now, the problem with that is people in various families look alike, so you can't necessarily prove reincarnation from that, but you can have families that appear to look the same even if they're in different bloodlines.
Mm-hmm. And then, so that's just the soul that's coming in and out between history. And then there's no variance, where it's no set map. It's just divine connection to whatever the purpose is, because we're resetting and setting up for the next life and setting up for the next life, which means somebody has to know the direction we're heading. So what is your feeling around deja vu? So like if there's a future and we're following all this genetic memory or this consciousness connection, we're hopping through lives to get to this goal because somebody knows the end. We make a mistake, and then deja vu happens. Did we relive? Do you believe that that's like a reset, like something happened in the future and they just brought us back to that moment and try again? Or like, what's your thoughts on deja vu?
Okay, so deja vu. Remember again, everything is in science, everything is recorded in your subconscious as a positive or negative. In past life regression, all of these memories from your past lives are in your subconscious, and again, saved as positive or negative. So the deja vu event could be when you're driving down the road, and in a past life, you're maybe driving a horse, but you see something that's dangerous in the road. And suddenly you get the deja vu. I've seen this before. So you try to avoid it so you don't hit it this time. Or you're walking down the road and you turn the corner and you run into somebody you ran into in your past life.
So that's like you were saying earlier, when you burn your finger, you remember you're doing it again, right?
You're doing it again. And that's what deja vu is. You're seeing the event that occurred, or event so much like what occurred, that you either want to be involved in that event or avoid the event. So your past life is actually teaching you some way to survive.
Mm-hmm. So we see, that's what I'm saying. So much of these are different theories from all different types of understandings and studies, but it all connects to the consciousness. All this is corroborating. All this is collective evidence. Mm-hmm. So it has to be true. And so, do you want to go? We got how long? We got another 20 minutes here. Let's talk about the current UFO release and government talking about things and potentially keeping secrets from us. Don't necessarily need to talk about that specifically, but on the subject of the government knowing more than is revealed, is it possible that, or do you know that maybe the government is aware of all these things that we're trying to, now we as civilians are understanding? Is there some sort of suppression? Is there some sort of game? Is there some sort of hinder that's preventing us from reaching this potential? And if so, why? And, what are we, what's going on? Why haven't we figured it out yet?
Well, one of the reasons we can't figure it out, Ryan, is that I don't think everything is secret. And if you look at the stuff that we know, because the real the real evidence of UFOs that exists is Umwawa, is the best evidence out there of something that came from an outside galaxy that passed through our galaxy that appeared to have some method of propulsion because it didn't react exactly the way it should when it passed the sun. There should have been enough gravitational pull to pull it in, and it didn't. Now, there's a lot of explanations out there for Umwawa, but one of the explanation is this cylindrical shaped asteroid is some sort of communication from outside the galaxy, or some sort of possible tritoconnections. Now, science can explain it. It can explain it because the nitrogen that's on the side close to the sun would increase its temperature so great it could start to explode, which could be the means of propulsion that took it out of the orbit. So there's an explanation by science, but it's something that's there that we really don't understand. The other thing we don't understand is that, you know, we're trying to send signals out, but nobody's responding. So we don't know if there's somebody out there who can receive our signals, but they're not responding. So we don't have any proof that's being released.
That's assuming that the government is telling us the truth.
Correct.
So is it possible that they are receiving a signal? Is it possible that they do have the answers and they're just not telling us? Why wouldn't they want us? Let's just imagine that they know how to control consciousness. Why wouldn't they want to teach us that? And your spirit guides are trying to help us, right? What I'm getting at, not to the conspiracy side, I'm trying to frame a future, like what's the plan? What's the end game for us as the experiencers who may also have these download noetic experiences? When we're experiencing this and understanding it and studying it, how do we use this moving forward for the betterment of the future? I guess that's kind of how I was trying to frame it.
Okay. How do we use this for the betterment of the future? So for us in our experience, part of this is that we are eternal, and consciousness is eternal, or the soul is eternal, and that there isn't just this life and you die. So the purpose has to be, the end game is when you no longer have to be doing this journey on Earth. But the end game that might help people is, if you look at science, we have an ever-expanding universe that could tear. If it tears, this universe will cease to exist as we know it, and it may implode. However, if there is a creator, source, Tao, God, whatever you want to call it, who knows what the end game is and the purpose is, that creator, Tao, source has a way for us not to have to return to this earth or this universe or this physical existence, because our consciousness, our soul, survives without it.
Okay. Good.
What do you think of that?
That's good. No, that's great. Great answer. No, it's all, hey, I'm just bringing out make this conversation deep and dive. Like these are all, I know a lot of things, but I'm not, about everything, but tying it all in, this is what I enjoy. Like it's pulling all these theories from different specialties and just make this melting pot of what is going on. And that's how we better understand that we are all connected. We are all together. We are all in this together. And unity is very important. And that's the trending thing right now, is we all need to work together. But a lot of people don't understand how. And in situations like this, where we can put, our theories and ideas to come to that common ground to understand that Carla, as you mentioned at the beginning, the 5 basic rules, that we have to follow. I mean, to keep it simple. To one, is do good, and good will happen. And there's and then so for me, I always say that if the spirit or the guide or whatever is telling you, if it's giving you a message, and the result of that message is leading to a positive thing, if it's good for you, it's probably good for the rest of the world. So do it.
Yeah.
And
Ryan, here's another one of those examples. When we got all of our past lives, we had them all mapped out, and we were looking through them, we found patterns. And they were really interesting little patterns. Things like, first we found out we had lives where we were white, and we had lives when we were black. We had lives where we were from China, lives where we were from Hebrew. We had a Muslim life. We had a Catholic life. We had Christian lives. We had Muslim lives. We live on both sides of everything. We looked at a series of lives together, and we found that we were Vikings attacking Scotland. Then we were Scottish attacking England. Then we were English fighting back against the Scottish. And then Carla married in as a Viking into the English life again, realizing that we had actually fought on the same side and the opposite side of the same war. So you could not win, because in war there really is no winner.
You got a good, well-rounded perspective.
Yes, because you lived on both sides and you realize you're fighting yourself. Those are the lessons that we've learned from past lives, that you have to live both sides. We've all been rich and poor, saints and sinners. We've all done some bad things, but yet we're given another chance. And then you start to say, is 1 minute of life, if you die as an infant, is that enough to decide you're going to heaven or hell? Is living to 18, living to one life? Maybe it's many, many lives before you can actually grow and learn enough to get off the wheel.
There is no hell.
And there is no hell, yes. If you really look at the biblical studies, and this is a couple asides that are interesting, but if you look at the biblical studies, in the Old Testament, it's Sheol, which is just a place dead people go. And then a lot was written in Greek, which was Hades, which is just a place dead people go. It's not a good or bad place. And if you look at the other place that they used was the Valley of Gehenna. And the Valley of Gehenna was actually a physical place on earth. And the physical place on earth was the ditch outside of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was built with this big circular sewage system that dumped out the side and ran into the Valley of Gehenna. So all the excrement, trash, and junk would drain into Gehenna. And historically, the judges and the old kings of Jerusalem would put their illegitimate children and their prisoners to death in the Valley of Gehenna by putting them on fire. And then the excrement would burn, and it would burn for days and days and days. The King James Bible converted the Valley of Gehenna, Hades, and Sheol to the word hell. And hell in Germanic was a grave that was buried, and the god of the underworld was named Helia. So they named hell after the pagan god of the underworld in Germany. And why? Because King James's wife was Germanic.
Well, you look at the history of religion. Every religion post or pre-Catholic or Christian has gotten it right to understanding that we all can explain. But then this current religion that we're currently battling with is the one that where all the changes are. And if they didn't change it, we would get it. We would have
a greater understanding of what happened then.
Yes.
Because all the other ones have parallels,
Mm-hmm.
right? Different names for different, the easiest parallel is Zeus is a being, as a person, or it's in Roman, it's Jupiter, a planet. So there's a different perspective, but still the same story, the same method, the same characteristics and things like that.
All right, Ryan, I'll just tell you this, and and I'm not trying to any of your Christian listeners, I'm not saying anything, but Zeus had a child with a mortal woman. And that sounds an awful lot like the story that God had a child with Mary.
Mhm.
And so there's a parallel in all of those lives. If you go back to the ancient Egyptians, they believed they died, and in 3 days later they would come back as God again. That's a parallel to the story in the Bible. If you look at Sumerian tablets, many of those stories show up in the Old Testament. So there's a lot of history there. And again, in the Bible, there's a big section where they make a large point that no one should do any divination. No one should talk to the spirit world. Nobody should do anything. And then in the New Testament, Jesus is up on a mountain and he talks to Moses and Isaiah, who were already dead. So it must be okay for Jesus to talk to the dead, even though the dead are all waiting to come back at the final judgment, which is the Christian theology.
I don't know. I'm gonna bite my tongue because we could go into like a really deep spot here, because that's where that is where the control factor starts to come in.
Mm-hmm.
The 12 disciples parallel all the 12. Jesus comes in, respectfully, however you believe it, however he's done, simply is someone in one rank higher than those 12. And because of that's great. We acknowledge these 12, which we call disciples, but are lesser than Jesus, which creates that opportunity to revere or to worship one step higher. But because there's one step higher in this current religion, where there wasn't in all those other ones, implies that this one step higher is in control of all. So that is where the Vatican gets their power, by saying, yeah, we agree to all these religions, but there must be something that created them. And so therefore, this is it, and here's our story. And furthermore, to go with that, as we evolve, many years ago, the Vatican Church, when they, and I have Christian background, so like I've done my own research as well. I once wanted to be a priest and all these other things. I've been through that rabbit hole. Okay,
Me too.
So I'm related here, but what I'm saying is the Vatican, when asked about extraterrestrial life, had eventually come forward when they need to explain the reason for having their own observatory. Why look for life out there if that's not in the religion? And the response for the press was, well, we'd have to be, it would be very naive of us to think that God didn't create aliens too. So again, under that pretext, accepting the possibility that we were created by a higher power, but still holding on to that card stating that no matter what you find in this world, we believe in something that created all of these things. And that was never present in all of the other religions, because there was 12, there was a team, there was an army, there was ranks, there was tasks. The disciples did the same thing. So that's kind of like where we're at. But Jesus, consciousness connection, there's that Trinity, Holy Spirit. That story also shows the idea that we are the temple. Everything is done within.
Mm-hmm.
Correct, Ryan. And if you look at the early Hebrew writing, and you do some of the research in Hebrew, it really says the temple is within you. And most of the Hebrew Jewish rules are, how do you keep your temple clean?
Mm-hmm.
Because the temple of the Spirit and God is within you.
So the message is still the same. The only thing that's changed is that we as man are in charge of it. That's where that shift happened. Otherwise, we need someone to show up and be like, hey, It was us. Because we're playing this big game of broken telephone. But even that, consciousness is the key. That's how we're all connected. So it doesn't matter what we believe, because you've lived all these lives. We've lived, there's all these religions with different things, but consciousness, you know, that's the key. So where do we go with that? How do you want to wrap this up?
Well, I just want to say, Ryan, you thought about being a priest. Dave thought about being a priest. I never considered being a nun. That's how I want to wrap it up. Not once.
The reason why I didn't become one is because I read after I wanted to study it. So I'm like, okay, this seems great. This is the path I'm in. Let me read the Bible word for word. First passage, you know, let us create man in our image and our likeness. I already knew that our was plural. That was my first question. You know, God was supposed to be singular. So who are these other people? And then that blew up to my world of Anunnaki and Nephilim and Sumerian. That's basically how all that stuff had happened. Mm-hmm. So that's where I draw my experience and my evidence to support that the Christian and Catholic faith is no more than education in like in a school program. But that's just me. Okay, so let's dial back. You mentioned 3 books, right?
Sure.
So The Gift of Past Lives with Mother Isabel, God, and Elizabeth was the first one.
Correct.
Then the second one, I'm trying to remember, Hell
No Reincarnation.
Okay, and the
that
third
actually is our reconciliation with our experience that happened in the Gift of Past Lives with the religious upbringing that we had, but we also include 7 more of our lives in Hell No Reincarnation.
And then the third one is the manual. Mm-hmm. So what is what are you teaching in the manual, or what is the manual?
You take this, Carla, because do you want to read?
What's in a manual when you get a manual?
Yeah.
So here's what's in the manual, and you can read into it. A manual usually consists of the parts that make up the subject of the said manual. It also includes a section on troubleshooting for when things are not working out as they should, and you must evaluate the situation. Then, there is a contact list of those available to assist you with the subject as a whole. And finally, you'll find the warranty information, and in this case, there is no expiration of the subject. Hopefully, there is also included a free lifetimes of service adjustments with that warranty. It also contains a method in which to contact the manufacturer. We talk about astrology, traits, archetypes. We weave one of our lives in Italy all through the book. And then we also give examples of some characters from history, well known, like Napoleon, Cleopatra, 3 consecutive lives. The one before Cleopatra, the one as Cleopatra, the one after Cleopatra. We talk about their traits, their astrological signs, and their archetypes, and why they behaved as they did. And those are interesting stories in themselves about those past people. And of course, that information was all given to Dave through Isabella. Okay. It's nothing you can look up in the history books, but interesting nonetheless.
Now, the $1 million question. Where can our lovely followers find these books?
Well, they're certainly available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, many other bookstores. If you go to our website, which is thegiftofpastlives.com, there are links to many book places that you can order and buy the books from. Okay. There's also more information, and through Mother Isabella, God, and Elizabeth, they can contact us too if they have specific questions.
So how can they find you guys individually? You guys also have a conference or a meeting coming up too in October, right?
Correct. We're at a reincarnation symposium, and I think the site that advertises it is Reincarnation Symposium, or you could go to Mother Isabella, God, and Elizabeth, which is our Facebook page, and you'll find the advertisement. Or you can go to Reincarnation, The Gift of Past Lives on Facebook. All of those will have directions to how to find out when the symposium is. It's in late October in Richmond, Virginia, and there's 8 panelists in total. It's an 8-hour day. It'll be available both on Zoom or in person.
October 30th.
Yeah, October 30th.
Okay, right on. And I guess that's it, guys. So thank you so much. We made it 2 hours, right on. That was heavy. I was sweating. This is good conversation. I really enjoyed this. So I will send off to everybody. If you guys want to have a quick chat at the end of the video, I'll hang around and we'll talk. If
Sure.
not, have a lovely night. Thank you so much for joining us. Everybody who is in the chat, thank you so much. Shout out to Chantel. You're the only member here tonight. The rest of you guys, thank you so much. Remember, bonus content if you subscribe and become a YouTube member. And I will see you tomorrow at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, where I do my off the cuff. You get to ask me anything. Just talking if you want. We can elaborate on my opinions on the Catholic Church. Why not? Let's get into that. So thank you so much, and thank you guys for sharing the stage. It was just nice having